When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Thank you for listening to The History of the Papacy. I am your host, Steve. We are on Facebook and Twitter, and you can find both by searching for A2Z History. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can always send me an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com. We are now on Patreon again. And if you sign up for Patreon, you will, of course, greatly help this show. I can't even say how much it helps the show and keep this whole operation going. But you'll also get new episodes without advertisements, and you'll get them early. And you'll also get an audio feed of the new YouTube exclusive, The History of the Papacy in 10 minutes. There's also many other great rewards based on the tier that fits your budget best. One of the best benefits is you will be admitted into a special club, the History of the Papacy Diptychs. Now, in sacramental Christianity, in the liturgy or mass, the hierarchs and the biggest names in the church are remembered in the diptychs. If you want to be remembered and have your name immortalized in the History of the Papacy Diptychs, all you have to do is become a patron on patreon.com/History of the Papacy. I also want to thank today Jerome for his kind and generous donation through PayPal. Just another option to support the show. So many options, but the biggest one is to just listen and maybe even tell a friend. And of course, subscribe to the new podcast feed on YouTube, all of which are in the show notes. Now let's commemorate the Patreon patrons on the History of the Papacy Diptychs. We have Joran and William at the Alexandria level and Paul the Magnificent at the Constantinople level. Now, this is another one of these episodes where you will also be able to get a little snippet of this and a little extended version of one particular moment of this podcast in the new History of the Papacy in 10 Minutes episode. If you're into the long form, you can get this whole conversation that I had on papal encyclicals. And now you know as well as I do that papal encyclicals are a big deal and they don't come out very often. Encyclicals are the way that popes of Rome push out their big new teachings. Francis I has been Pope for a little over 7 years by this point in October 2020 and has just published his third papal encyclical. Francis's encyclicals are whales, too. They're huge documents stuffed with carefully worded language. We've brought in today a guest to talk about this latest encyclical. Glenn Amorosia is an amateur historian of papal encyclicals. I will let Glenn introduce himself shortly, but I need to mention that he is an incredible resource of knowledge for papal encyclicals. I really like to support people who dedicate their spare time to these intellectual pursuits and really mastering a subject area. With that, join Glenn and I as we dissect this latest papal encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. I want to welcome back Glenn Amorosia to the History of the Papacy. Now, Glenn, this is actually his second appearance on the episode, but you wouldn't know that because we haven't released his first episode yet. But Glenn is a highly interested person in the history and the general topic of papal encyclicals. His future episode, which was actually recorded in the past, is about the history of papal encyclicals. But today we're going to talk about the very latest, hot off the press encyclical by Pope Francis called Fratelli Tutti. Glenn, before we even get started, maybe you can share a little bit of how you got interested in this topic of papal encyclicals.
Sure, Steve. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you for inviting me to speak on this.
It's my pleasure.
This is a very timely topic. I got involved. I've been a Catholic for my whole life, and I realized that what the Pope says within the Catholic Church is very important, especially in encyclicals. That's kind of the highest form of papal teachings. And, in some cases, he's considered infallible. So in these cases, we like to hear what he has to say. So when I had some time, when I retired a few years back, I decided I'm going to read as many of these encyclicals as I could. So I went back to about 1878, actually maybe even earlier than that, 1848, and read the encyclicals. There's over 220 or so encyclicals. And in doing this, when I started taking notes on these, I ended up writing a book. It's been not published, but for something for my own use, which shows the importance of encyclicals and puts them in a historical context, these 220 encyclicals, and shows how they reflect not only the Pope's teaching and the Church's teaching, but it reflects the times. It's important that we look at these encyclicals because they're fresh off the presses. They address issues that are timely right now. If you read the Bible, which is important to read too, but the Bible tends to be over 2,000 years old. But if you want to read about issues that the Church takes on, whether it be the nuclear age, or poverty, the environment, you can read these straight off out of the words of the popes of recent years. So that's how I got involved in it, to put it mildly.
As of the recording we're doing today, this, if you're listening in the future, this encyclical was published in October of 2020, and it covers a really wide range of topics in almost 43,000 words, which, just to put that into context, that would, if you were to include this encyclical in the Bible, it would be the longest book of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And it's actually longer than, or almost as long as, two of the longest Gospels combined. So if you're going to write a document that's this long, there's going to be a lot of content in there. Now, it's interesting. This book, or this encyclical, it was written in Spanish, or at least that's what I obviously read it in its English form. What was the language that it was published in?
Well, the Pope publishes it in many languages. If you look on the Vatican website, it's probably published in 10 to 15 different languages. Traditionally, they had been in Latin and Italian. And actually, my understanding is this was published in Italian, but it was Fratelli Tutti is actually Italian. It's a translation of the Latin Omnes Fratres, which means all brothers, which is from Admonition 6, which is a little sermon that St. Francis wrote to some of the monks that he was speaking to back 800 years ago. But traditionally, lately, they are published in many different languages.
We talked about it off air that this is a huge document, and we could probably spend weeks dissecting it. What's maybe the 10,000 foot view of this document, and what's maybe the big themes of it?
Some of the main themes are this is specifically an advocation of all brothers and sisters. The world, all the people in the world be considered brothers and sisters, as opposed to having walls or borders between them. Now, this can be looked in the geographic sense of borders, between countries, but it can be looked as borders between peoples, between you and I, for example, between conservatives and liberals, between progressives and conservatives, between Democrats and Republicans, between Marxists and white supremacists. This is trying to be all for people to look at themselves all encompassing and to not ignore the borders between them. You very much be aware of them, but not to look at the treatment of people as different as one side of the border from the other. This can be considered, and I know as Americans, we probably say, well, this is certainly a shot at our current president, but I would say, look at the 10,000 foot view. He's the Pope here is trying to say that people should be viewed as one family, all brothers and sisters. It is, from the 10,000-foot view, certainly to be looked at as a criticism of the Western lifestyle. And there I'm talking about consumerism, I'm talking about materialism, the primacy of the marketplace. But nowhere in this encyclical does the Pope come against private property. In fact, he says private property is very important for people to better themselves. What he is against is strictly taking that private property for one's own selfish use and for using it against other people. He speaks, and this is not something new, by the way, in papal teachings or in Catholic teaching. This is very much a part of Catholic social justice, which began back with Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIII's discussion about labor and private property in 1891. And there have been several others that have gone. There could be several other encyclicals that they considered part of this Catholic social justice teaching, this being one of the most recent ones. But the Pope here is just trying to say we should get away from radical nationalism, radical individualism, and look at each other as brothers and sisters.
How would this is Pope Francis's third encyclical. How does this fit in with his other encyclicals? Would you say that there is a common thread? Are they maybe sequential, or should we understand this one as more of a standalone document? Of
the three, Lumen Fidei, really he co-authored, and some people say Benedict, he co-authored it with Pope Benedict XVI right after he had resigned. I really consider that more of Pope Benedict's encyclical. So I looked really at his most recent encyclical, Pope Francis's most recent encyclical before this one, Laudate Si. By the way, that one is even longer than this one. When I translated to pages, it was 88 pages.
Oh, wow.
This one was only 82 pages, which includes 16 pages of footnotes. But the two are hand in hand. You could say that Laudate Si, which is also called Our Common Home, which is about the environment, broadly speaking, was a cry of the earth. Fratelli Tutti, which translates as all brothers and sisters, is a cry of the poor. They're very much interlinked. This one just focuses less on the earth or the environment, but more so on the poor and people in general. So I would say this is very much in line. And you'll see a lot of his quotes, Pope Francis's quotes in this encyclical, are directly from Benedict XVI, John Paul II, John the 23rd, and other of the most recent popes.
I find these documents interesting as coming from maybe a different perspective that my focus has been on the early church. But in a lot of these documents, they always seem to source each other or more recent popes. Is that maybe a part of encyclicals where they're not using so much of biblical resources or early church documents as their source material?
I think you could say that's correct. In looking at the encyclicals over the past 250 encyclicals going back to the mid-1800s, there was a traditional format where the basic theme was said, then there was the basis out of the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, then the fathers of the church like Irenaeus, Polycarp. Then they go to the medieval saints such as Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure and Anselm. Then they would kind of work into some of the other popes, some of the earlier popes, Gregory the Great, Leo the Great, and then they would work their way into the more recent popes. Francis has gone straight with the theme, and then he has not used that basic format, but has interspersed his discussion with Bible verses, other popes' verses, encyclicals or admonitions, exhortations, apostolic letters, this type of thing. I did see your comment that he did not use the word Jesus or God that much. I did a quick word count. He did use the word God 80 times in this encyclical, and he used the word Jesus almost 50 times. So I can see what you're saying. It's spread out over an over 80-page document.
I got one question. Well, one thing that I've been thinking about, doing a little bit more research about some popes from the 19th century onward, it seems like in many ways, like people want to paint them in a corner of, okay, this one is a capitalist pope, this one's the Marxist pope, but and everything that I've read, it seems that they almost see things in more of like a medieval world structure economically, that they're really not, they're interpreting things through a very different lens maybe than we interpret both economics and current politics through. Is that, you think there's some accuracy in that, or am I missing the point?
I think you're certainly correct from the point of view is that they do not like to let themselves get cubbyholed into being a capitalist or a socialist or a liberal or a conservative. I think what they are trying to do, and they build one on the other in this Catholic social justice teachings, is they're saying they kind of create their own terms. There's a couple terms that they use that have been predominant since Leo XIII and have been developed with Paul VI and John the 23rd, and now into Francis and John Paul II. And that is the priority of the poor. There's definitely a sentiment that the rich and the wealthy, the powerful, they can take care of themselves. And if they're not, if they should be looking after the poor. The poor cannot take care of themselves. They need to be helped. And then once they are given education, some employment, they can start getting some private property. Then they can start taking care of themselves. But if they are, we talked a little bit about, I saw in some of your notes talking about liberation theology. There's liberation theology, which is conservative, and there's liberation theology, which is more radical. Francis has been accused of being in liberal theology, but he's also been accused of fighting against it. I would say he is more middle of the road or even more conservative. He does not say that Jesus was a revolutionary or a Marxist, which some of the more radicals would. But he's definitely coming from the point of view that the poor, the disabled, they need to be, the elderly, they need to be assisted. He is not against private property. There's several remarks in here where he makes, that he's very much in favor of private property. But there's a terminology that they have used over the years in these most recent encyclicals called the common destination of goods or the universal destination of goods. And basically what that means is everyone is entitled to private property, and it's a very good thing. But it is not right to use it just for strictly selfish means, and it's definitely not appropriate to use to oppress the poor. This goes back to, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term of latifundia, but that goes back to Roman times, Roman emperor times, when the rich and powerful in Rome would build up these huge estates that would take over acres and acres of land. It would be taking it away basically from other people and used just for their own selfish goods. And latifundia have existed in the present time. You still see them in South America, for example. Folks over the years have said that latifundia are not an appropriate use of private property. It must be used for the common good of people.
This document was written at a pretty critical time in history. What do you think, what is the purpose of a document like an encyclical? Is it basically just the Pope at that time just kind of reflecting on what's going on, or is there more of a purpose in it? Is it meant to be a daily teaching tool, something that, or something that maybe bishops and priests kind of peruse over and take bits and pieces out of it of what they think they might be able to use, or is it a more structured tool?
Look, there's two parts of that question, Steve, or two ways to answer it. First of all, an encyclical over the years has been considered a letter. And if you look back at the at the encyclicals of the popes in the 1800s and the early 1900s. They were letters, before we had broad use of aircraft and of the internet and that type of thing. So letters were the way that the Pope would communicate to his bishops and archbishops, etc. They has definitely got away from that. There used to be an introduction to all of these, or salutation of all encyclicals, and it would be something to the effect, and I'm quoting here, to his venerable brethren, the patriarchs, primates, archbishops, bishops, and other local ordinaries who are at peace and communion with the apostolic see, to the clergy and the faithful of the entire world, and to all men of goodwill. That was the salutation. It was like, dear archbishops, bishops, and priests, etc. Francis has totally gotten away from that. He doesn't make any pretense that this is a letter. These are really, in my terms, and this has been evolving over the years, but Francis has taken it to a point of it no more looks like a letter at all. It's really a white paper or a thesis, and it's specifically, now to get to the core of your question, what in 2020 has inspired Pope Francis to write this encyclical? And I think it's two things. Number one, the growth of nationalism and populism in the world. Not just in the United States, but he's talking about President Bolsonaro in Brazil. He's talking about Boris Johnson in England, and throughout the world, we're seeing a growth of populism and nationalism, which Francis sees as a very detrimental effect, especially with technology the way it is right now. Everybody has social media, everybody has the internet, everybody has high levels of communication. All of these things, these tools, instead of being used for positive things to bring us together, they're using as things as separating us. The second thing is COVID-19. He's saying this would have been an excellent opportunity to have, and I'll just give you a quote. This is from an early part of this encyclical. Quote, as I was writing this letter, the COVID-19 pandemic unexpectedly erupted, exposing our false securities. Aside from the different ways that various countries responded to the crisis, their inability to work together became quite evident. For all our hyper-connectivity, we witnessed a fragmentation that made it more difficult to resolve problems that affect us all. So he's seeing kind of a perfect storm. We have this technology which should be helping us during this COVID-19 crisis. Instead, it has split us apart through these nationalistic, populistic, political things, movements, and individually people are, and he brings this up several times in this encyclical, they're kind of isolating themselves in their own chat rooms and social media, and whether it be Twitter or Facebook or what have you, rather than bringing us together, they're being used to tear us apart.
Does he address it all in this encyclical, maybe practical things that day-to-day people can do in their religion to deal with the COVID-19 situation, such as really that to me seems like what I'm having a difficulty with maybe encyclicals in general, and especially this one that's now directed more towards the people. Like, what is your average person supposed to do with this? Because I mean, I have to imagine that there's of the 1.2 billion Catholics out there, that's probably an exceedingly small amount who are going to read an 82-page document with 16 pages of footnotes. Like, is there an expectation of what people are to do with a document like this practically?
And you're very correct. I would say that if there was 1% of the Catholics read this document, so it's left up to the clergy to and others that have more official positions within the church to spread the word. Usually, what happens in something like this is that this may be preached from the pulpit on Sundays. Typically, what will happen is usually most parishes have a social ministry. I myself, for example, back in the early 2000s, when I was living in Houston, was part of a refugee resettlement ministry. There's the St. Vincent de Paul, which gives aid and assistance to the poor, whether they be homeless or food banks or this types of things. What I expect that Francis wants to see from this for the individual is for them to not listen to the nationalists and the populist rhetoric that tears people apart and that say we need to build walls. But he's saying, keep going to keep supporting your food banks, keep reaching out to the homeless, keep reaching out to the disabled, keep reaching out to the elderly, whether it be visits to the elderly or visit the hospitals and this types of things. And avoid categorizing people. And I think this is one thing he's saying is people through the different social media are dividing themselves into whether they be different political parties. And remember, this is a global document. This is just not aimed for the United States. This is aimed for Africa, South America, Asia, Europe, etc. He's saying reach out across the borders and fences that you have there. He does make a statement in here, a very strong statement later in the document, that people in the church should not avoid getting involved in politics. Now, in the United States, what does that mean? It means one thing, then it means different than in Russia or in Africa or in South America. It means get involved in the level that you can, and don't just back away from it because you consider yourself a Catholic and should be involved in Catholicism or be involved with politics.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.
Now, a huge document like this, and it's obviously, it's long, but it's also very dense. And there's many ways that each statement and each paragraph and chapter can really be interpreted. Is there a next step to this that maybe makes that whole document more maybe accessible to turn into teaching documents? Because it would seem to me like if you're going to spend that much time writing a document that's parsed like this, that you don't want individual priests or teachers or whoever just taking it and running with it in all different directions. Do they issue any further maybe guidance documents on a document like this?
There will be some of that. Catholic Church is in many ways very decentralized. It may seem like it's centralized, but there are many, many, many organizations within the Catholic Church, and they'll take some of them will decide to ignore this document. Others will take it and run. So there are certain. I would expect that in Catholic universities and in some of those social ministries that I spoke of earlier within the various parishes around the world, they'll run with it. Others may just have a sermon or two on it on a Sunday and go with it from there. I myself, when it comes to say Laudate Si, which was written 5 years ago, I have been kind of underwhelmed by the way that has been spread out within the church. Really, right now, that's kind of a separate fact within the church right now. There's a lot of division. There's I would say kind of a group of people that favor Pope Francis's approach considerably, but there's a lot of people who do not appreciate it. They were more comfortable with the conservative approach of Benedict XVI or John Paul II. So where some people may teach it or bring it up, there's probably an equal number that will tend to ignore it.
Yeah, that's something else that I've been thinking about and reading about is you have an organization like the church in general and then the Catholic Church more specifically that really it's a network that's very dispersed, like you said, and then it also has a very strict hierarchy, and there's definitely some conflict when you try and put those two things together and make them work, and it is more of kind of a long game approach to governance and organization.
Yes, I mean, like I said, I've been a Catholic for my whole life, and I could enumerate for the listening audience today, groups that would be considered more conservative, groups that would be considered more liberal, and the Pope tries to tie that together through these encyclicals as best he can. They're always trying to take an approach that's down the middle of the road. They never, and I reemphasize, they never advocate a certain ideology. They are not Marxists. They are not conservatives. They're saying private property is highly appropriate, but not you can do anything you want with it. It has to be used for the poor. So they're always drawing a line somewhere in between those movements. There's not a specific ideology. And when we were talking about liberation theology, they're not advocating anyone here the overthrow of governments. In fact, he comes out very strongly against the use of violence for any reason. Now, he does, interestingly enough, there's a couple places he does say here, though, is that if people are oppressed, violence is fairly inevitable. He comes up with statements that you could be read in that direction, that he's not justifying violence, but he's kind of saying it could be the natural outcome of discriminating or oppressing peoples.
And that kind of leads into the next point, and this is a huge point in my opinion. After reading your notes and reading through some of the document, and then listening and reading some of the other people who have interpreted this document, is that Pope Francis comes out completely against the so-called just war theory. And just like very shortly, what is the just war theory and where does that come from?
Catholic social teaching, or not Catholic social teaching, but Catholic teaching has generally attributed the just war theory to St. Augustine back in the 400s. I personally think that it existed in the Roman Empire before that the Roman Empire did not believe that you could just go out and attack another tribe or another nation. They said that it would have to be, quote unquote, justified. Augustine did, though, spell out, and I don't have an official document in front of me, but he did say self-defense or fighting for a just cause or for an oppressed people, that there was a justification for violence. Now, having said that, Pope Francis in this document here basically says that the just war theory is not correct. He's saying that, but he's basically saying that the just war theory in modern days, where we have nuclear weapons which do not discriminate between civilians and non-civilians, and that they can kill so many people, he specifically calls out and condemns the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki back during World War II. He's saying no more war. There is no such thing as that can justify a war. This is something new. I'm sure it will be debated within the Catholic Church, and some people will say that, well, he's not saying that it can't be at any time. But the way I read it, I tend to favor the total opposition to war. I'm saying he's definitely saying that there is no such thing as a just war.
So he's specifically picking apart that traditional teaching and saying that basically the thing that holds up that theory that you can really only attack somebody or start a war is if you've been attacked. He's basically writing off that whole idea? Is he replacing it with something, or is he just basically changing to a pacifistic stance?
He is very much advocating any steps short of a violent situation. Negotiations, discussions. I mean, he is very strong throughout this document. I didn't do a word count on it, but the word dialogue appears many, many times in this document. He's saying that no good things comes from war. There has to be every step possible before going to that stage. That is the basic premise he has. Early in his or later in the document, he quotes, and I'm looking for it here real quick. He quotes from the some of the original documents of the United Nations Constitution, that this is the direction that we should be going. And I don't see it here right away, but he says that we should be relying on organizations such as the United Nations, and he's saying yes, it could be improved. It's kind of fallen out of favor in some ways over the past years due to the nationalistic movements within the countries. They're saying any type of dispute should be referred to negotiations and, where possible, to organizations such as the United Nations.
Well, I guess my first question is, because we could get in a long discussion of that, and I'm sure people are going to get into a long discussion about that, but what kind of weight or how will this affect going forward in a time after Pope Francis? Does this become a precedent at this point, or can the next Pope say, well, no, we're going to go back to the pre-Fratelli Tutti days with something like just war theory?
When it comes to the just war theory, like I said, Steve, will it be interpreted? And here's the exact quote. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war. Never again war. That's the exact quote from this document. Now, the way I interpret it is there is no such thing, the way he interprets it, as a just war. I think other people will interpret it otherwise. So, yes, you're right. We could get a pope who comes out, after Francis sometime and work around it. The popes try to work it together. I don't think you will ever see a pope come out and advocate war. It's just a matter of in what cases can violence be used. And here's the quote that I was looking for earlier. Speaking of the United Nations, to this end, there is a need to ensure the uncontested rule of law and tireless recourse to negotiation, mediation, and arbitration, as proposed by the Charter of the United Nations, which constitutes truly a fundamental juridical norm. War can easily be chosen by invoking all sorts of allegedly humanitarian, defensive, or precautionary excuses, and even resorting to the manipulation of information. And that's where he comes out and says, never again war. He says you can come up with all sorts of excuses for just wars. Not just the U.S. in its recent history, but almost any country that starts a war will say it's justified for one reason or another.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.
So I think it's confusing for me, and it's probably confusing for people out there. In this sort of situation, the Pope is not a dictator, and the things that he's saying in these documents, they do kind of enforce rules, but is this now saying that this is the official teaching of the church, or is he just throwing his hat in and things like this and saying, this is my opinion and this is how I think we should carry forward? Like, what kind of enforcement mechanism does this have? Now, obviously, the Pope and the church only has so much to say, like if country A attacks country B and whether that's justified or not. But as a teaching of how the church goes forward, is there is him saying something like this, and then an issue that we'll get to next on the death penalty, is this now official Catholic Church teaching going forward, or is it his opinion on this and this is where he thinks it should go forward?
I would say it's more of the latter, and you bring up a good comparison: war versus the death penalty. Here, I think he's drawing a line in the sand. Here he's saying, I don't think that there is such a thing as a just war. He does not come out and say that he's making this part of his infallible teaching. With the death penalty, he comes against it full strong in this encyclical. But even prior to this, he had come out in a more infallible way and saying there should be no use of the death penalty. That is now official church teaching, and it has been accepted within the Catholic Church. By some very reluctantly, but it has been accepted. I think we'll start seeing now this encyclical's discussion of just war, starting that discussion again. I'll come short of saying right now that he is saying that this is part of the infallible teaching of the church, but he's now drawing a line in the sand and says we should definitely start moving in that direction.
Let's quickly talk about the death penalty, because I think that that's another one that it's a big topic that when you have, if you picture an organization like the Catholic Church, it's the trying to move the Titanic, and it takes a long time for it to start making moves. And this is something that's been a long time in the coming. What was the traditional church's view before, let's say, the last several decades on the death penalty?
The death penalty had been considered a last resort, but an acceptable resort within Catholic teaching. It was not proposing it. Though in this document, Pope Francis cites several people in the early Catholic Church. He cites like Lactanatius, who I've never heard of before, but he says, for example, that there ought to be no exception at all, that it is always unlawful to put a man to death. He cites Pope Nicholas I. He cites St. Augustine as having been opposed to the death penalty. He comes out very strongly against it. And in this document, as opposed to with the just war, he elaborates, not only is there no place for the death penalty, but the person who has been spared their life with, say, a life sentence instead of being given the death penalty, they should be treated with dignity. That these people are just as much brothers and sisters as anyone else. He quotes here, it says, if I do not deny that dignity to the worst of criminals, I will not deny it to anyone. He's challenging us. He's saying, if you can be merciful to a convicted murderer by not using the death penalty, but if you can do that, this should show that you can be merciful to anyone.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that things like just war theory and a lot of these ideas that are practical government, the way you would run a government, is that the church up until the 1800s was a government, and now it's kind of... It doesn't have practical day-to-day government. So it kind of switches the focus of how they can influence. They're really now influencing other governments more than actually running their own government.
That's a good point. I think, what you're talking about is that the popes were the king, so to speak, the Pope king over the papal states from the mid-700s till the mid-1800s. And I think one of the best things that ever happened is they had those lands taken away from them when Italy was united as a country back in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, in that time frame. And they were inhibited to some extent by making some of these more progressive statements as they are now against the death penalty and against war, because they themselves were kings over fairly large territories back in those days. The Papal States was probably as big a city-state as any other of the Italian city-states at that time.
Yeah, it really is interesting to see through these encyclicals how the church has changed and how the role of the papacy has changed. And as switching from the prince of a not insignificant country to becoming more of a as they might say in the modern parlance, a social influencer of a much larger movement, and that they don't have to balance their role as being an influencer with actually being the prince of a country.
Yes, I think there's been it's taken a while. Like I said, they were the prince or the king over those lands for 1,100 years, and then even after they were taken away from them, they still maintained the right that they should get them back. It wasn't until I think it was 1929 with the Lateran Treaty, which Pope Pius XI signed with Mussolini, of all people, to give them. To give the Catholic Church sole possession of the Vatican at that time. But the Papal States were gone. But they have had a freedom now to really forget all their secular interests and to move ahead as kind of a spiritual influence within the world. I think this has been very predominant with not just Francis, but with John Paul II. They have. They've traveled all over the world to, hundreds of countries and have been able to, garner the audience of millions, literally millions of people wherever they go.
I guess to wrap up today, it's a question I have for somebody who's done so much research into these encyclicals and the popes who've written them. Do you think this is a magna opus for Pope Francis? And that maybe he gives a break on encyclicals, or do you see that there's a natural follow-up to this encyclical?
I think that the tendency for encyclicals has been less of them and longer. It was very common for popes through, let's say, John Paul II even, and even Benedict XVI to write one encyclical a year. They would not be nearly this long. This, like you say, has been only the third for Francis, and like I was explaining, it's really only his second by himself. And his last one was 5 years ago in 2015 with Laudato Si. I don't see him writing a lot more encyclicals. He's more of a face-to-face person. He has a very, like you said, you described it as dense style. He is more difficult to read than, say, Benedict XVI was and some of the earlier popes. What I would hope to see is that he encourages this, the messages that he has here, that we all be treated as brothers and sisters, whether we live on this side of a border, then on the other side of the border, or whether we have this particular viewpoint versus another viewpoint, that we all be seen as brothers and sisters. This Catholic teaching is very much Catholic social teaching. So I would hope that this message is somehow put into a practical viewpoint throughout the church. And like I said, I think it's going to more happen with some of its social ministries within the diocese, within the parishes. Some of this can come from the top, but only time will tell how well. And it's not coming exactly at the best time with COVID-19. So it kind of prohibits people from meeting other than Zoom meetings or remotely as we're doing here.
Yeah, it seems to me that this sort of document that's packed in so much information probably needs some time to settle in and be talked about before you throw out another one that's even on another topic that you'll kind of water down. the message that he wants to go through with this document, if he puts out another one next year that's similarly as long, similarly as in depth, and on even maybe a different topic, that you really need a chance for this one to be absorbed before you go on and move on to another major change in church ideology and discussion and debate.
Yeah, I say the trend is against that. The hope would be that this is implemented within the current structures of Catholic social teaching, with, like I said, the St. Vincent de Paul Society, with Catholic Charities, and other organizations. He's asking for the people to reach across the borders. And he brings up several times here his meeting with one of the head imams of the Muslim religion. He brings up times that he has met with some of the leaders of the Orthodox Church. So I think these are the kinds of things that he can be looking at. He can be asking other religions that are out there to implement this within their own structures too.
Well, you are definitely a man after my own heart. You were interested in encyclicals, so you dove in, you wrote a book about them, and you, even though you're not an academic in this topic, you're just a person who's really interested in it, and you dove in and you did the research, and I think that's completely commendable, and I 100% understand it. Is that your focus of your study right now, or have you branched off into other topics, maybe church related or not?
Well, funny you should bring that up, because I am also part of the Thomas Merton International Society. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was a monk who lived back in the 1940s, 1950s, and unfortunately passed away in the 1960s. He would certainly be worthwhile to have a discussion about within the context of your podcast. But he was very much a leader during the 1960s from the Catholic Church in the anti-war movement. He was also a leader in the civil rights movement within the Catholic Church. This is how I first became familiar with him, and have been studying him in some different reading groups, and have written some papers and such on him. But he was a Trappist monk, which is a monk that within the normal day does not speak. But he was very learned in that direction. He, of course, was a strong advocate of Pope John the 23rd and Vatican II back in the 1960s. And he, unfortunately, in a trip to Asia, was killed in a freak accident where he was electrocuted. But that is certainly a topic that you might want to look at, and I would love to talk to you about it some future time.
Well, that's awesome. I want to thank you so much again for coming on, and I've been meaning to talk about more current events and church current events, so I thank you for helping me with this.
Well, thank you, Steve, for inviting me, and would love to be part of any future podcast or to help you with your research on similar topics.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.